So good morning, everyone. It feels good to be back to Indonesia Blockchain Week. And I'm also very happy to share the stage with these three panelists, where we're going to discuss about the blockchain innovations locally and also globally. But I think there was a very short introduction from the MC about our three panelists, but I'm going to let you guys also to introduce yourself, what you guys are doing. And I think we can start with the very first questions is to listen about your perspective in terms of blockchain solutions that are being evaluated, I think, globally. We can start with you.
Sure. Thanks for the introduction. I'm Chua. I work with Tether, so I look after the regulatory affairs and licensing team for Asia region for Tether. Tether is a global stablecoin issuer for USD-pegged stablecoin, and my key focus in Asia is to speak to policymakers and legislators to harmonize the stablecoin framework in this region. Yep, and a bit of a use case for stablecoins for USDT. Generally, I think stablecoins is used for a few key use cases. I think most of the people know that stablecoin is used for trading for crypto assets. I think that has been the primary use case, but increasingly we're seeing stablecoin being used for inward cross-border or our cross-border remittance from developing emerging markets to more developed markets and vice versa. It has also been used quite a fair bit now, increasingly for making payments or paying services to local merchants, and also we see it being used for payout or payments for tokenization of real assets. So increasingly, we are seeing a lot more real-life use cases for USDT or even for generally the stablecoin market.
Hi, so my name is Paulo. I lead partnerships at KAIA Foundation. KAIA is a layer 1, started by Kakao and Line Messenger. So anything that crypto happens in the messengers, it's usually run on our chain. I guess what my focus is going to different countries, really seeing how the businesses want to join into, like you said there, where I'm looking at use cases like remittances, compliant money flows, maybe having commerce adopted through crypto. So that's why we integrated with Tether, for example, like this year in May, right? And I'm also looking into local stablecoins. I know there's several here in Indonesia. We've already, I think we've already signed with 2. Yeah, so I'm pretty excited about that, and that's why we're here. We really want to expand more and get to know locals more. It's a huge trading opportunity and crowd here. It's even an esports competition yesterday and today. So we're pretty excited at diving into that, and I'll be glad to share more later on as well.
Pagi semuanya. Hi everyone, just wanted to say, let me start with first and foremost, congratulations, Indonesian Blockchain Week. I heard 5,000 attendees yesterday, right? So massive turnout. I want to say congrats. Say hi as well with some of the rangers in the room here, Kevin, alone, right? In the front row. Asih as well, big congratulations. Look forward to actually contributing to this. My name is Yudho. I run an exchange called FLOQ. But today I think I'm wearing a different hat. I'm not talking about crypto assets, which is an application of blockchain technology, but today it's more of the technology itself and how can we discuss in terms of inclusion applications in Indonesia. I think for me, it's a topic that's very relevant. 10 years ago when someone brought me the idea about Bitcoin, I believed in technology, but I did not believe in the asset class at that time. That it will grow at least to what it is right now, right? But the technology itself was always had the potential to make a lot of changes, especially in a country in Indonesia, where things are very fragmented. In regional language, that means complicated. It's still not English. But well, let me put it this way, right? So I think Aaron, you touched about payments, for example, and how blockchain, the work that you do, can help payments in Indonesia because of our history and policy. in banking regulation in the 1980s, we used to have hundreds of banks, thousands of BPRs, right? So different payment architecture that actually still provides some complications till today. And not to mention a lot about how we record data, how to track pretty much everything, right? Budget spending with the government is always an issue here. And I look forward to the discussion today. I mean, I think let me just close with, I think in crypto section, crypto, right, in the community, a lot of things are really driven by hype. Unfortunately, maybe a bit boring, maybe some of you are not signing up for this, but when we talk about blockchain application, especially for national agenda, it's not going to be driven by hype. It's going to be driven by, I think what we'll be discussing today. It's going to be legal, regulatory, compliance, security, and all these things, right? But again, I think I'm excited for the potential implementation of blockchain solving national issues, and hopefully we can see it happen.
Thanks, guys, for the introduction. So, being in this ecosystem for quite some time, I think we've seen a lot of development, of course, locally, globally. And I think what happened also in the US when Trump came up with a lot of a few acts, like Clarity Act, Genius Acts, also I believe really impact the ecosystem globally. So you touched a little bit about the regulatory standard, compliance. So I think since 2022, the association we got a few interest from COMBIG, which is our ICT ministry, where they want to explore blockchain solutions in digital identity. So I'd like to ask you a question like, how can data-driven blockchain systems comply with regulatory standards around privacy, identity, and auditability?
That's a good question. But to be fair, let's put jokes aside. That is the question that we need to answer before we actually make that happen, right? Nationwide blockchain implementation. So for something that's really addressing national and social issues, unfortunately, we need to take away some of the great things that happens or comes with blockchain. Anonymity, right? That's number one. And secondly, being fully decentralized, unfortunately, right? I mean, it's the government. It is what it is. And that's those two things. So, you asked the right question. Indonesia has the customer data protection constitution. That's not just a ministry regulation. So, I think we can start with as simple as, in my view, a blockchain technology that can work to support the country must allow and differentiate what stays on chain, but also what stays off chain, especially trying to comply with the Undang-Undang PDB. So that would be number one. So if you really want to convince the government that there is actually a blockchain technology that can be used and compliant and solve Dukcapil, for example, KTP, or we take it to cross-border payments that actually really needs to connect to national IDs as well, and banking. So those data that actually stays off-chain and also sovereign in Indonesia. It is what it is. Unfortunately, that takes away the greatness of blockchain, right? But then what can stay on-chain is the hash, the proof, right? If some of the data process can be encrypted and then processed for validating transactions, payments, then I think that is a great way to actually combine the effectiveness and efficiency of blockchain, but also complying with local standards. I think, first of all, right, we need to solve that governments to buy this idea first. And that is by complying with that. I think that will be number one. Of course, I'd like to think for national implementation. I know Indonesia, right? I think unfortunately one of the big limitations is still digital literacy as well. If you really want to make this nationwide, you gotta think of the people who live in more of remote and rural areas, right? If that's the case, do you really want to give them self-custody? Probably. So at the very least, custodial is also, again, takes away everything that's great about blockchain in the first place, right? Then it might be something that's hybrid in terms of ownership, especially on the data as well. But then keep the great things about blockchain, which is, you got to make sure that data cannot be edited, data can stay transparent, right? That is, I think, ultimately that's going to be what we want to do is in the first place. The trust elements of blockchain. Yeah, so I think those are maybe initial thinking for what I think if the region government wants to adopt the blockchain technology, those are the things that I feel like we need to rush out in the first place.
Thanks. Well, these are really good points, and I heard that some of the government officials or even regulators are coming today. So hopefully this is a good points for them to consider. So Paulo,
Thanks for reminding me that, so I have to be careful.
Right. So Paulo, since we already touched on that side, I think next consideration is about the technical side. So I'd like to hear from your perspective and KAIA experience, like what technical considerations like governance, auditability, and interoperability are most important when designing blockchain infrastructure?
I guess the primary incentive for trusting blockchain really is that it's trustless, right? So for example, for KAIA, we have a governance model that you can see how much we spend on conferences, how much we pay our employees collectively. This is key because in a world where there's a lot of under-the-table transactions, these high-level decisions, and because we have to be accountable to people as well. Right? I know we're not a security, but there's some tension. So I think that transparency at a high level has to be fully satisfied. So what does that mean on-chain? What does that mean for us in relationship with financial institutions? So that means it has to be readily auditable. So when we work with local stablecoins or other stablecoins, for example, like Tether is very at the forefront of transparency as well, right? Like you readily publish your reserves. So the same for us, we implemented tech that auditors can find out any given supply of any given token at any time. And number two, they can see holdings of any given wallet at any time. So these make it easily communicated for attestations. You need to attest what are the assets that we have. Because in this industry, unfortunately, there's a lot of fraud, right? There's a lot of shady businesses where you play with this financial engineering, very creative financial engineering. But if we overcome that hurdle with transparency, that's number one, that's easy to do. Number two, like Yudho mentioned, the industry is also very fragmented. Web 2 and Web 3. Even Asia itself, we have different standards. It's only come this far where even QR code is somewhat united. The queries with a QR page can now be like one standard, but before it really wasn't. So this kind of interoperability is, I think, something that, from a tech perspective, we also are solving right now. So we're doing it through a bunch of things like, layer 0, royalty layer, or different kinds of bridges. These actually mirror existing Web 2 practices. For example, banks have to do FX rebalancing, right? So the same happens with something that is on-chain. But the key here is we have to make it economical. Like what you said, it has to make sense. But if there's so many layers of fees, then it doesn't make sense anymore. So I think from us as a technological layer, I guess those two are important. There has to be transparency. Not just for narrative's sake, but actual utility. And number two is different institutions have to be able to communicate and work together, interoperability.
Paulo, you mentioned about how Tether is already, I think, big enough and be, involved in a lot of discussion, especially about digital payments, which I think is a pretty hot topic at the moment. So Aaron, how are blockchain-based instruments being used globally in the context of digital payments and settlements?
Before I go into the questions, I've got some points to add on the on-chain and off-chain perspective. I think a lot of people or folks kind of think that blockchain is the savior for everything, and they forget that there is the off-chain, offline element. And I guess that perception comes because we have been talking about crypto assets, where the value is on-chain, But when you now speak about real assets, where you have to now merge the offline assets to the on-chain assets, how does it work? So I guess the fundamental question is, how do we match the offline assets and mirror it to have it verified and recorded on-chain? And that's where I think as institution we must never forget the fundamental principles of how the traditional FI now is and works. We do not dismiss the principles and the values of what the traditional FI are doing. For example, how do we custodize properties? How do we custodize securities? How do we custodize monies? I think all these principles are still there, and then we just add an on-chain layer to essentially do record keeping, to remove all the unnecessary intermediaries, to reduce costs and inefficiencies. And I think that begs the questions of the use case for cross-border and settlement. I think the big use case for stablecoin is that it reduces a lot of frictions point between a lot of intermediaries. Essentially, if you are a holder of a stablecoin in your wallet, you could actually make payment directly to a merchant that accepts it. But of course, that comes then with the maturity and acceptance of merchants to readily accept USDT or other stablecoins. And of course, if the merchants are not ready to accept stablecoins, then you will need to work with a licensed off-ramper to essentially off-ramp the stablecoins into fiat and then transmit it to the merchant. So hence Tether, or I guess any issuers, would always in this ecosystem work with many players. Players including off-rampers, players including custody players, or players or infrastructure providers that provides the self-hosted addresses. I think when all this comes together, you will realize that for cross-border settlements, it's more frictionless, the costs are lower, and it's also faster. And then if you add on with how we can program the money, we're able then to essentially program the money to be able to only pay to certain designated merchants. And that actually also solves the compliance burdensome requirements of how you KYC the merchants, how do you ensure that the money is being used for the right purpose. And that's where you can actually program money in a smart contract to allow the stable coins to be used only for certain specific merchants. Yeah, so I think that is how cross-border can be used using stable coins and reducing the inefficiencies and also reducing compliance costs.
Thanks, Aaron. I think we're going to dig deeper into it later. Being quite familiar with the Indonesian market, I think from the perspective of the government, I think there's a big goals when it comes to financial inclusions. And I think we mentioned a lot about decentralization, and also I believe blockchain is offering that kind of decentralization. So, Paulo, in terms of inclusions, I'd like to ask about the limitations or risks that should be considered when assessing blockchain for inclusion-related use cases. What limitations or risks should be considered when assessing blockchain for inclusion-related use cases?
Right. Well, this is always difficult because, like what Yudho said, blockchain, you want to be as decentralized as possible, but because we want to play nice and we want adoption, we have to protect the man on the street, right, or the common man. And the way to do that is to be accountable. But we want to be inclusive to everyone at the same time. So I guess we are moving towards less of the rebellious crypto cypherpunks era to now playing with financial institutions and more of the boring route. But to do that, for financial institutions to happen, we have to participate and really have to play nice with the government. I think like what Yudho said earlier as well. What we're doing is we're doing test pilots. So, like Aaron said, we participate in a few sandboxes. We are participating maybe in a sandbox in Thailand for two of those, and they don't really call it stablecoins. They call it programmable payments. They call it purpose-bound money. from the Bank of Thailand. So purpose-bound money, how it works is the government knows who are the ones that exchange external stablecoins like Tether into their bank-issued Thai baht purpose-bound money, which then and then the next step is then they have a whitelisted list of shops or merchants or companies that are actually able to use this. So this kind of path is a path to inclusion because it's compliant. You know, and we're doing the same thing with, for example, Vietnam, where we only want to work with licensed individuals. It's very important for compliance, right? I think there's only one licensed wallet provider in that country, for example. So we work with that to have a proof of concept for a bank in Korea, maybe, for example, right, to do cross-border payments. But as long as it's compliant, that's the way for us to tap into inclusivity. How we're doing it, from an app perspective, we're introducing something in the messenger itself, in line, for example, where there's like a neobank-ish approach. But the touch point is, like Aaron said, the custody is not with us, the custody is with the users themselves. And the on and off ramp is done with compliant partners, whether it's Pay, whether it's a local exchange. You know, so I don't think there's any other way of doing it. Otherwise, it would be very rebellious.
I think I like to also echo what you said, like involving merchants who's also SMEs, which is a big part of the economic, part of the Indonesian ecosystem. So I think that's going to be a really good example for financial improvements. And I think we also have to be, appreciative to our regulator here in Indonesia. We already have a sandbox, regulatory sandbox here. And I think they're very open to looking into the innovations that's happening in the ecosystem. So, I'd like to ask, which future direction will Indonesia explore in assessing blockchain's potential role in digital financial ecosystem?
Yeah, I think there's actually a lot of practical applications and really solving a lot of potential issues, but I can name, since OJK is probably the only one that is really open for sandbox right now. So I think a lot of these things are following to what you just said as well. If we really want to make this practicable inclusion, then we might want to actually go through the sandbox first. So I can think 2 or 3 things, perhaps, if we identify, right, what's the potential for practical solutions to blockchain applications. Number one, what's really, I think, not really reaching the potential here, unfortunately, is lending, especially for MSME, web KAIA. A lot of potential, but unfortunately, Indonesia, a lot of people since 30 years ago said, oh, we want to revolutionize lending. Right? Indonesia is going to move from collateralized lending to digital and non-collateralized lending. It hasn't happened, unfortunately. So I think especially on the MSME lending, you want to find a model, especially for supply chain financing. Right now, unfortunately, the way to go about it is still, I think it's okay, it's more like invoice financing or PO financing, right? But then, still a lot of fraud. And that also takes, unfortunately, fintech and also banks as well. So I think if we really want to try to do this and then identify one ecosystem where from principal, distributor, and customer, then you want to record everything on chain, right? So that actually validates the transaction, the settlement, and a bank can actually access those records to underwrite a loan. So 2 things I think in Indonesia in terms of lending, right? That's an issue. One is efficiency itself. The process might take really long. So it's basically kind of stops when the principal wants to purchase like for a supply, for example, right? That takes away only 2 or 3 months just to secure the loan. And the second one is the risk itself. I mean, to be fair, the bank they have to put a higher price to compensate the risk. Right? So my dream is, you want a low-hanging fruit. It might take some time to implement the blockchain, but this might be the solution. Then we can go through what you guys sandbox for this one ecosystem. Yeah, and then scale from there. It takes a while. This one. Secondly, money movement cross-border, and in fact in Indonesia, right? Domestic settlement also is a bit of an issue as well. Honestly, it's not just cross-border. I mean cross-border for sure, but then I'm not talking about the retail payment. I'm talking about domestic distribution with such a large country, a bit fragmented as well. So there's a lot of potential there. I think number 3, Indonesia, there's this one thing we call bansos, like social help, right, donation, and then also subsidies of the government, where unfortunately perhaps trust is very difficult right on that. But the use of blockchain can really help in terms of in making sure that the money is received from the recipient. There has to be validation, right, based on that ID as well. There has to be kept in the chain as well, right? At least the proof again, but the data can stay off chain. I think something like that would be interesting to apply in Indo. Sandbox might not be with OJK, I don't know, Caperig maybe, right? I think that's something that is could be interesting as well. I don't want to go this far, but maybe if trust is the issue, blockchain is the best to solve trust, right? Government budget spending tracking through blockchain, maybe. But that is something I think could be interesting as well. I'm Indonesian, I can say this. So, so yeah. Anyway, a lot of potential applications, but yeah, I think essentially, if I could wrap up, right? I like what Aaron said earlier. Blockchain application doesn't replace institutions. It actually reduces friction between institutions. Right? That's the key. So, and enhances trust. So I think the direction where Indonesia is going, really enhances the trust through blockchain, right? Reducing friction. And those are 2 or 3 key areas which I feel practicable and can be done in the next 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, could I add something? So on the loan side, I think Singapore MAS recently came up with the Bloom sandbox, and one of them is about tokenization of payables. And I think to reduce the elements of credit risk and how that works, it could be, for example, Amazon as a big e-commerce player and with all their merchants, and the merchants that wants to access to the funds more quickly, because merchants may not receive the funds immediately after the payments by the end users. Amazon may take T plus 70 plus 30. So a way to reduce the credit risk and allowing the merchant to access the funds quickly is really to tokenize these payables, where I, as a debtor, I know that the payable will ultimately be resolved or be paid by Amazon, which of course credit rating is higher than the merchants. I buy over the payables from the merchant. I give the merchant the access to the liquidity immediately. I, within T plus 30, get back the liquidity from Amazon. And you tokenize that payable simply just to increase the distribution channel. Now, I don't have to have one debtor, which the bank to finance the entire loan. I can now distribute the payables to multiple debtors. And multiple debtors can now buy into a receivable that we receive from Amazon at a later time. So I think that's how blockchain enables not only reducing friction, but also expand the distribution channels and network to allow SMEs to benefit, but at the same time allowing the debtors to participate in the receivable that is almost AAA guaranteed.
What I'm hearing is actually that if we really want to make sure that the solutions works effectively, because they're involving a lot of stakeholders, multiple partners that you mentioned. So Aaron, what collaborative mechanism can support coordinated assessment among payment providers and fintech operators?
I think it's all about open communications with all the different ecosystem players, I think including the regulators. I think for Tether ourselves, when we look at the ecosystem and we look at how increasingly this sector is more regulated, we always ask ourselves, do we understand the local market and the local regulatory consideration before we enter into the market? And that's why we need to have a very deep dive into the regulatory concerns. And a lot of times these are talking about whether are we able to do inducement in the country, are we able to do marketing in the countries. And like what Paulo said, right, the first key is how do we then go into the country and work with the license provider? Because the license provider is the one that will encourage the use case of stablecoins or USDT in the most compliant manner. And for Tether, we can now be a bridge for the ecosystem where we see ourselves as the tool to enable the fund transfer between various players, like the fintech players, like the payments provider, like the infrastructure provider. Will come into the picture and we ask ourselves which are the licensable activity and which are activity that is licensed, and we then approach those licensed players to do certain part of the payment flow. And then what are the infrastructure providers that come in to provide that technology know-how that doesn't require a license? How do we then work with them? How do we bring these providers into the ecosystem, allowing the ecosystem to partake and participate with the providers, leveraging of the license, payments provider license. So of course all these are talking about where there's already a regulatory regime and a licensing regime. For example, in many countries now there isn't yet a stable coin regime. Of course we see Genius Act, we see Charity Act, we see Hong Kong, we see Singapore, but in the emerging market there's still a lot of countries that still doesn't have a stable coin framework. And how do we then go about developing this space? I think Tether always want a transparent and inclusive ecosystem. And how we do that is that we proactively engage in consultation with various policymakers and central banks to be able to help them, to educate them, to shape their stablecoin framework, so that the idea is that we can have a harmonious stablecoin framework in most of these countries in this region, riding on already international standards. For example, when we talk about international standards, we talk about how other countries are seeing stablecoin regime, also how international bodies are seeing stablecoin regime. For example, the Financial Stability Board, what are the 5 or 10 factors of risk and governance that they see a stablecoin regime? So our role is really to come into the space and educate the policymakers, the central bankers, to understand what and appreciate what's happening in other parts of the world, and hopefully with more harmonious stablecoin standards and a more transparent and inclusive ecosystem, that's how we can encourage innovation, but together with making sure that the standards are compliant with international standards.
Thanks, Eric. We've been hearing a lot of things, so I want to pass the mic to the floor if there anyone wants to ask questions. It's not your everyday view to have experts from KAIA and also FLOQ. So anyone? Okay, I'll give you another chance later. So we touched on the compliance side, but I also want to know about the government side, which is, I think it's also an important part, and it's I think also part of the compliance itself. Paulo, or what lessons can be drawn from existing use cases that apply strong governance models in blockchain networks?
Say it again.
What lessons can be drawn from existing use cases that apply strong governance models in blockchain networks? I'm not the one who ran the questions,
yeah.
you know.
I'll answer that with what we're trying to explore. Like Yudho mentioned earlier about SMEs, right? Access to credit. Because, for example, we're participating in an official sandbox in Malaysia where we source liquidity from other parts of the world, like through stablecoins. That's then placed in which then connects to our DEX. So it's like a Kickstarter fundraising platform. But the risk framework lies with with our partner instead. You know? So we don't claim to be experts in compliance, but to the best of our ability, we want to work with in a very hyper-local manner. So, for example, in Indonesia, we'll be through OJK. That's why we have like IDRP, for example, that participates in Open Sandbox. In Malaysia, there's Peer Hive for SME loans. In the Philippines, there's the Cadena chain, which is because it's a very corrupt country. So there's a move to put government budget on chain. So there's no single answer to compliance, but we have different governments having different approaches to compliance. So does it mean more on transparency? In terms of how money flows? Does it mean more on protecting the investors, and who bears the risk? That's maybe the concern for Malaysia. In the Philippines, it's more the concern for transparency. In Singapore, Singapore is very international, so MAS is very strict as well, but slightly open. There's Project Guardian, there's Bloom as well, where there's the tokenized funds, credits, Guardian as well, right? So we want to work with, we don't I guess prescribe how compliant should be, but we want to make sure that we just work through whatever framework is available. Because we don't have the licenses. I think maybe this is for the audience know. Layer 1s generally don't have, we're the infrastructure. So we're technology provider. Think of us like internet or Swift or Visa, right? So we're something that people build off of, and the touch points are the ones that hold the licenses. So in a way, it's a unique perspective. Yeah.
Thanks, Paulo. Last chance, guys. Any questions?
Hello, my name is Dendi Ligarda from Alpha Global Inovasi. So I would like to live in state in Indonesia right now. I believe blockchain is the great adaptation for decentralized. Like where is the great potential? Where is the great potential for the transparency? And so there's a fair data between company and user, or in the government and the citizen. Probably I'm agree with Pak Yudho about we need to improve the digital literacy, probably need technology. Beside of that, what do you see in the future in blockchain in Indonesia, or especially in the companies or in the government right now still centralized, which is many company on the government still centralized. Can we solve the problem, and what's the step of it? What's the step? Should we start educating to the citizen first, or probably we start with the government first? That's my question. Thank you.
Question, great question, Mr. D. I think the question is how do we want to implement this, and how do we start, right? I think you mentioned something about everything is centralized in the government, right? Unfortunately, you can give me inputs here, but I want to be realistic. I think implementation for blockchain nationwide, right? There is a degree of centralization to it, right? It cannot be again fully decentralized because there's a bit of a trade-off. The trade-off is, for example, if it's fully decentralized, then it may be taking away a bit of customer protection, especially also in a country where digital literacy is still very small, right? How actually we can solve if customer lost access to an account, for example, recovery. Then, in a way, there has to be some kind of centralization who manages this. But yeah, I think, in my opinion, potential is there. I think I mentioned, right? 1, 2, 3, lending, money movement, bundles, data tracking. I forgot one thing that is actually always an issue in Indonesia. Land registry. Apa badan BPS pertanahan. Jadi, I think there's a lot of potential there. And I think, unfortunately, right now I am not seeing outside OJK. In fact, unfortunately, BI is not that urgent as well on money movements, right? We are not seeing the urgency. Now, how do we actually get there? I think what we are able to do is, Asih and I, we're in the association ABI. We are getting a new, I should say, leader or officers, right? And a new mission as well. Starting in 2026 with better resources, better alignment with the government. And we want to be using and becoming a bridge for someone like you and the ecosystem. And then the likes of Paulo and also Aaron to really illustrate what can be done to the government. It's going to take some time. We haven't even talked about economics yet, which is key to make this work, right? So, yeah, realistically, Indonesia is going to involve these kinds of conversations. Some areas, especially in the association, private companies will have to invest first, at least time and resources, right? Then we try to make it happen. Yeah, I'll be very straightforward as well on this. It takes time to get a bit political. If you really look at what happened in other countries with the global impact involving the ecosystem for president election, i.e. Trump. So let's bring 3 years from now. I can say this right now, Indonesian as well. So I don't know, maybe the next president-elect will want to involve this ecosystem. And the ideal scenario for ABI to be already at the forefront of this idea. Then it becomes a national agenda, if you really want to make it happen, right? What, 2-3 years away now, 2029, right? But the work is to start at this one next year. I think that's going to be a big agenda for ABI, for the ecosystem. But yeah, I'd love to hear what you have to say about this as well.
So also to add, I think blockchain can be used as a tool to reset a lot of these legacy systems. And I was very intrigued when I was looking after APEC. And interestingly, Cambodia is the only country that actually now has already used blockchain as a messaging tool for the national QR code among banks. Of course, the settlement is still via traditional means, but the way of settling and recording is done via blockchain. And it could be the reason so being that their legacy systems are just not capable to do real-time settlement. And instead of unwinding back and going back to say, okay, let's fix those issues, blockchain could be the solution of resetting and doing what traditional capability are doing in a blockchain way. So I think that could be one thing for Indonesia to think about. But also secondly, and you're right, I think it comes with the commitment from the private sectors and also the government sectors. And this could be done on a sandbox level. When I say sandbox level, it's not a project level, but it's a city level. So we see that in Vietnam, where Vietnam has Da Nang and has Ho Chi Minh as the international financial center, and it becomes a test bed for the government to work with private sector to use blockchain and stable coins as a means of payments in a confined city within the confined premise of the merchants and enterprises in that city. And that could also be something that Indonesia should consider when talking about sandbox on the city level rather than the project level.
Thanks, Aaron. Thanks, Paulo. Thanks, Yudho. I know we probably have a lot of things to say after this, but we've run out of time. I think the key takeaway from this discussion is that, all of you here understand the benefits and the values of blockchain, but a lot of steps needs to do to make sure that this can be implemented properly. And I think we'll be around here, so if anyone have questions, we'll be here to ask questions. Thank you, and pass it back to the MC. Thanks, guys.
Alright, thank you so much. Once again, can we give a big round of applause for this such an informative session. Thank you, Asih, for conducting this discussion. And can we have a group photo first? Before we let you guys off the stage. Once again, this is our first panel for day 2 of Indonesia Blockchain Week 2025. Thank you so much. Big appreciation to our speakers. Chua from Tether, Paulo Caperig from KAIA, Yudho from FLOQ, and also Asih as our moderator.